Well, hello, my fellow students. Kevin Slater here. And it is week 3, and we are looking at, for the most part, Strasbourg and pretty much everybody around Strasbourg and what's going on with that. So let's get into it. The text took us from essentially back to Matt and its founding, and Gordon starts with the 100-year anniversary. Um, and essentially, what it boils down to is that things are falling apart. Everybody's going different directions. Shocking, everybody has different opinions. So the focus obviously was on Strasbourg. And Strasbourg has made his way from, learning Stanislavski to the foundation of the group theater. And then he goes off on his own. Well, not really on his own, but he joins by invitation the actors studio, and becomes a major part of it, including guiding the way actors are trained. So now he has just a whole lot of burgeoning actors at his beck and call as far as training is concerned. And he's going to be training the future actors of America, amongst the others. But he's got a pretty loud megaphone being in the actor studio. So the takeaways that I have on all of this are, well, rather interesting. Well, one, I have to say, and it wasn't really included in the recording part of this, but I have to, watching the video, listening to the video, it was an audio recording. I found it fascinating listening to it. It just kept catching my ear that whenever Strasbourg referred to anybody, an author, anybody he was talking about, it was always in the masculine. It was always in him. He's going to do this. He's going to do that. I almost went back and re-listened to the whole thing thinking it was my bias that he had spread the love and that there was discussion about females and males. But I didn't bother because I realized I was pretty sure. I listened to the beginning of it, but I didn't listen to the whole thing, that he never used the term her or she. I just found that fascinating. And I don't know why I'm starting here, but I think it's important to sort of recognize Strasbourg was a man of his time. And I think that might have been part of the problem he was having with Stella Adler and some other people. That's just my personal opinion on it. And no particular data other than the fact that he kept referring to everything, the analogies he gave, the stories he told, that he kept referring to him. It was always masculine. Anyway, so the breakup happens and everybody's going different directions with the way they're teaching and their interpretation of Stanislavski and how it should be done. And I guess my big takeaway from all of that was, I'm not terribly surprised at all. Anybody who's done theater knows that one of the most complicated parts of theater is to coalesce around concepts. You put a creative team in a room, and half of them want to direct the show, and the other half want to tell somebody else how to direct the show. And it's to find the right creative team that melds together and doesn't have opinions that the other ones are doing it all wrong, and for whatever reasons. It's just I'm going to argue, it's human nature. We analyze, and then if we're in leadership positions, we tend to see the flaws in somebody else's plan, or the flaws, the way that other people are doing it. And I would clearly state, based on all the reading and my knowledge of what ends up happening to the group, it's no surprise that it didn't stay together for any number of reasons, but egos are among that. It's that we just don't all look at the world the same way. So here Strasbourg ends up in a place where he's got the hearts and minds of burgeoning theater professionals, and he's the one teaching them, and they're going to teach two friends, and they're going to teach two friends. And so it concerns the other ex-members of the group that they think he's terribly wrong in his approach. And of course, he thinks they're wrong in their approach. And they're going to argue it out. And then it gets more complicated in the text with, Adler going back to France and an interpreter talking. So there's a third party who's trying to make sense of all of this. And everybody hears, there's the takeaway. Everybody hears what they want to hear when it comes to what the master Stanislavski has said. So they're all sort of very selectively picking the things that Stanislavski says that bolsters their argument or their approach. So there's my sort of overview, I think, of where we went with the chapter, and this sort of unit of study. There are a couple other things I wanted to talk about. There was an interesting part about the transition from what if to justifying. I get it. That's the two schools of thought, that the what if stays within the spine. It stays within the script. So the what if says, what would your character do if this happens or that happens? And therefore, are you as an actor going to be able to justify or to be able to act that? Whereas justification, it's can you draw on other experiences for you as an actor that you can use to justify what you're going to do with that character, or how that character would react. I'm not going to lie. I end up I was raised in the justification world. So it's what I'm passing on for good, bad, or indifferent, which is, that we can still keep the script at the core of things, the message, without a question, our interpretation of the author's work, what we think the author's intent is. But when we hit something that the author's written that we can't quite figure out how to wrap our brain, the actor can't wrap his brain around, or her brain around, I think that it's perfectly acceptable to, in my world anyway, so I guess I lean in the Strasberg camp on this one, is to draw from your own experiences, and go ahead and then use that experience to project it onto your character and to the scene work and to the script. So I found that really interesting. I think we need to talk about the dangers of the stuff the text does. The danger is that, oftentimes educators, especially in theater, find themselves as some sort of amateur psychologists. They mention it in the text, that they think they know more than they do. You're asking actors to reach deep and potentially pull out dangerous stuff as a way to explore and bring out the emotions of their character. But are we ready to handle it if that doesn't go well? Which, Strasberg was concerned about. And he was very concerned that, if you're bringing this stuff in, that you run the risk that the actor can lose control. It's not a controlled way to approach emotion if you're trying to get to an emotion, and you're just not getting it from the text. So if you go to that deeper place and you start pulling from your own, now he's not saying you shouldn't pull from your own experiences. He's just, this is where it gets a little sticky. He's just saying you need to be careful about going deep enough that you're now pulling emotional stuff out that you can no longer control. And he's also got concern over, and I do too, that it's not repeatable. If you dig to some deep, dark place to draw out the tears that's not related to the script on one given night, you're changing what's going to happen on the stage at that moment. And then the next performance, you get up to do it and you don't draw from that same pool again, the reaction is going to be different. And therefore, the emotional roller coaster is going to be difficult for the actor, difficult for the actors you're working with, and inconsistent from an audience's perspective. I'm with Strasberg on this one. It needs to be controllable, and it needs to be repeatable. But if I had a student one time who was playing a character whose spouse was died in the scene, and the way it was written and staged just sort of drifts away, and then suddenly he's burst back into reality again, with people asking him questions, and he's got to deal with the fact that his wife just died, at the same time he's being hammered with questions. And so I looked at this young actor and said, well, how are you going to react to this? We don't want it to become tears. We don't want it to become the end, but you certainly have to present a loss. And how are you thinking about doing that? And he didn't have much because he was young. And I said, well, has anybody close to you have ever passed away? Grandparents, parents, that kind of thing. And the answer was no. I said, did you ever have a pet die? No. He didn't really have anything to draw on. There was no major loss in his life. I was kind of jealous. He had pretty much never had any major loss in his life. And I said, well, then you got to think about what has affected you in your lifetime that sort of made you sad that somebody that you knew went away. We sort of toyed with the idea, and then think about how you felt in that moment, and see if you can recreate that experience when the scene happens where you have to think about somebody disappearing, going away. So that's the surface version that I used. But you can see just on the story I told you how dangerous it could have been to me to pull something deeper certainly out of an actor who isn't ready to explore those things, let alone try to control them and use them in a theatrical environment. There's, I know we were supposed to talk about dangers a bit. There's my sort of warning. We all need to be, as professionals, as we start developing our own ideals of how to teach the method or Stanislavski or, all of it, as we pick and choose, as others have done, what we like and what we think works and what we don't. We need to be really careful that the end user understands the journey they're on and has complete control of the journey they're on. So there you go. I think that pretty much covers what I wanted to talk about in this week's unit. I can't off the top of my head think of anything else that we covered that I'm clicking around, sorry, while I'm talking to you, because I'm thinking maybe there is something I left out. I made a note to myself, and I like this as a takeaway. And I'm just going to read it to you. Theater is an art, and I find solace in the fact that people considered to be the founders fought and debated the craft as much as we do in our time. Art is a never-ending process, and it is a human endeavor, which means no two interpretations will be exactly the same. And that means not in our teaching, not in how we create the art, and certainly not how the audience perceives the art. We personalize, and we have our own views about it. And when I wrote that, I thought, yeah. And I love that takeaway because it made me think to write it about how we are human, very Shakespearean to err is human, and to have differing opinions on how all of this should be done is absolutely perfectly normal. And we're reading about a group that was incredibly artistic and got the work done and then fought about it. Shocking. On that note, I hope you all had a happy Easter. I'll see you next week.